Welcome to our podcast of Treat 'em, Don't Just Street 'em. My name is Randy, and this is my partner in crime,
Christina.
And we're going to talk today about leaky gut. It's a little cliche because there's got to be 10 million podcasts on leaky gut. But we're going to approach this a little bit differently. So we hope you'll stay and listen. We hope you'll subscribe, push the little subscribe button, and follow us on a regular basis because we're optimistic that you'll hear and learn things that you may not hear elsewhere. So Christina, I want to ask you, what percentage of your patients do you think have leaky gut, regardless of what their main complaint is for coming to see you?
I think that's such an interesting topic because it is out more in the media now. It's something that we have known about for a long period of time, but now people are more aware of that topic. Or it's like, I think the better question is, who doesn't have leaky gut?
Yes, that was my thought. I think 100% of our patients have it. So let's take back number one today. If you have any form of chronic disease, you probably have leaky gut in some form or another, and you've got to sort through that. A lot of people have symptoms, right? I was just talking to a friend today who grabbed his belly and he laughed, oh, maybe this is leaky gut, maybe it's bloating. Well, it's more than just weight gain and more than just bloating. So walk us through some of the symptoms. What are things that you often see that clue you in? If someone comes and says, my back aches or I have a headache, why do you think most of them probably have leaky gut?
Or a huge one is depression, anxiety, and autoimmune diseases. Yes. So the minute that I see those things, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, chronic pain, back pain, we start to ask the questions. Are they on a proton pump inhibitor? Seems like everyone in the world is on a medication.
That's omeprazole, or the purple pill, if you didn't follow what a proton pump inhibitor is.
A medication for reflux or heartburn. So many people are on those. And the question that we stop to ask is, why did you get put on that in the first place? What's the root cause? But most people don't understand. They're just like, well, I've got reflux, I'm going to take this medicine. Or when you start to ask questions and you say, well, do you have abdominal bloating? Do you have pain? Do you have constipation? Or do you have a regular bowel movement? And
okay, so regular bowel movements, that's a loaded question because I ask people, do you have a regular bowel movement? And they say, oh yeah, I poop every 3 days. So I've had to change the way I ask the question. That's not regular, right? You can't go poop every 3 days and say things are regular. A normal bowel movement frequency is probably at least 1 to 2 times a day. Mm-hmm. If you're pooping 6 times a day, and it's like someone turned on the faucet, that's a big problem. And there's many clients that I work with that's become their new normal. They don't even think about that as pathological anymore. That's just, they eat something, they gotta poop, and they gotta do it 6 times a day every time they eat. That means you probably have leaky gut and you've gotta do something to address it.
Yeah. I always go into the question, is it a soft bowel movement every day? And then I say, if you're not having that,
this is such a goofy
You're
topic.
keeping all those toxins in your body. Like, you need to poop every day. And they're like, oh my gosh, why are you talking to me about this? But if you think about it, the reason that we do that is to get rid of those toxins. All the things that are brought into our body, the way it goes out is poop. So
okay, so if we're going to talk about stool, how often do you do a stool culture? Because there's lots of tests, lots of labs that want you to send in a stool culture so that they can test it for bacteria, they can test it to see how diverse your microbiome is or how diverse is that little ecosystem deep in your bowel. Do you do that testing?
I don't do that very often. And the reason is, and I always encourage patients or people to ask me this, if you're going to do something, does it change what you're going to tell me to do? And having that testing done doesn't necessarily change that all those symptoms could be the types of foods that you're eating, the timing that you're eating them. So it doesn't necessarily give me information that I would need in order to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, it doesn't change your decision making on treatments.
Right.
I've probably done the poop studies maybe 50 times over the last couple of years. And it always shows me that the individual has low diversity. So there's this imbalance of their bacteria. Mm-hmm. I've only had one person ever that had Enterocolitica yersinia, which is a bug that needed treatment with antibiotics. Now, this lady had diarrhea for probably 10 years following a trip to Peru. That's the one lady where that test really made a difference. But otherwise, I agree with you. I don't think it changes the intervention. I will tell you that I did PCR testing. If you've heard of PCR testing out there that you can do a stool sample, and PCR means that they will look at the DNA in your stool, and it's like putting a puzzle together in reverse. They can take the DNA of the bacteria and match it up and tell you what type of bacteria is in your gut. I had results back today on an individual who had diarrhea for 2 weeks. He'd done traditional stool testing, and that test came back positive for salmonella. So now we're going to be a little bit better with our testing, right? So our point to this is there's a lot of kind of vogue testing out there that's expensive. Insurance doesn't pay for it. And I think we both agree it's not necessarily the best thing you can do to try to determine if you have leaky gut. So what else do you do? What are some of the symptoms that clue you in? You talked about depression, anxiety. We talked about frequency of bowel movements. Are there any other symptoms that stick out to you as kind of keystones to identifying your treatment?
I would say a lot of the autoimmunity, it seems like everybody has some form of an autoimmune disease, and whether it's been specifically pinpointed or not, how do you describe to people why you're asking them about symptoms of gut health, and how does this whole concept of more and more people having autoimmune diseases, in essence what they think of as their own body attacking itself, why is it doing that?
So I think the main reason why is that the immune system starts in the gut. Right? The gut is the border patrol. When you eat something and it goes in your mouth and then it comes out, it wasn't actually ever in your body. It was just in the tube, and your body's going to decide what gets absorbed and what doesn't get absorbed, right? That's your own body's natural border patrol, if you will. And when that border patrol breaks down, it starts letting some shady characters get into your system. And so now I lost myself in the question. What was your question again?
When people come in and they present with those kind of autoimmune inflammatory disorders, how do you tie, well, I think we need to look at your gut into that? Because they come in thinking you're just going to give them something for the inflammation, whereas we want to know why is the inflammation there in the first place, and how does it have to do with this?
That border patrol is your immune system. The immune system 100% regulates what gets past the bowel, and it's looking at the passports, and if you don't have a passport to enter the body, the immune system attacks, right? And I think that is one of the bases for autoimmune disease. Most of the current research is suggesting that to have an autoimmune disease, there's 3 elements. You got to have a genetic predisposition. You can't affect your genes. The second thing is the environment has to be problematic or contributory. And the third thing is there's probably some sort of a pathogen. And that pathogen can be a heavy metal, it can be a virus, it can be bad food that you ate, something like that, right? So that's kind of my response to autoimmunity and why it's so prevalent. What's your take on it?
Kind of that same idea is, let's talk about where it came from. Let's get to, for instance, let's talk about the types of foods that you eat. And people always ask me, or they say, I want autoimmune testing. So-and-so has it. I want you to do the whole panel. And I say, okay, I will do all that workup for you. There is a lot of blood work that can be done testing for various different autoimmune diseases. But what I always let them know is, while we're doing that, or maybe before I even do that, I want you to get a book on autoimmune disease and how much food, environment, sleep, the basics interfere with that, because or impact that or cause that. Because we can go down this rabbit hole of trying to figure out what this is, but regardless of what the answer is, my answer is going to be the same, to start with these basics.
Yeah, you talked about the food as fuel. And all of you that are driving cars out there, I want you to tell me, think about, is diesel better than unleaded fuel? And the answer is, well, it depends on what kind of car you have, right? Doesn't make any sense. You're never going to put unleaded fuel into a diesel engine and vice versa, because that engine will break down if you use the wrong fuel. And our body is the same. I look at all of the frankenfood that's out there, right? Frankenfood meaning just manufactured in a warehouse by young kids who are wearing hairnets and gloves, and they put it into a box and flash freeze it and slap an expiration date on it, and it's shipped across the country, and it sits on a shelf for 5 months, and then it gives you an expiration date. That is the wrong fuel for the body. You want the right fuel, you should shop in the produce section, you should shop in the butcher section, a little bit in the dairy section, and then you should leave the grocery store and avoid all of the aisles.
I have a perfect example of this. This is an awesome story, and I know you have amazing stories too. I had a 16-year-old that came to me about a year ago with excruciating abdominal pain, wanted stool studies, just felt bloated all the time, never felt well. We went through changing diet. She came back about a month later, and she felt amazing, and I didn't see her for a year. Well, what do we all do? We stop doing what made us feel better, right? So she came back to me a month ago with joint inflammation. Joints were inflamed, hands were red, knees hurt, abdominal bloating, abdominal pain. And her mom said, she's got this hypermobility. I think she has an autoimmune disease, and we think she has something called Ehlers-Danlos. But we want her checked for all these other autoimmune diseases too, because it runs in our family. And I said, okay, awesome. We're going to do that. We'll do all the blood work. And I said, but in the meantime, I want you to grab this book, and I want you to do two things for me. You're not going to like it. It's not fun because she's 16, right? I said, I need you to go gluten-free and dairy-free just until you see me the next time. And we kind of went through what that meant. What are those foods? And her mom said, you know what? I'm going to do this too, because it's my fault that you have these genetics, but also that what was in your environment has predisposed you to these feelings. So it was the best thing ever. She came back 3 weeks later to go over the blood work, and her mom and her both said, I feel amazing. No more joint pain, no more swelling, no more redness, no more strange rashes. And she said, I don't love it. And she works in an ice cream shop. Can you imagine working in Reed's Dairy and not being able to have ice cream? But she did it. And her mom said she had only had, her cheek was just a tiny bit of ice cream. And I said, how did you feel afterwards? And she said, I didn't feel good. And I said, that was reinforcing. And so it is amazing, the power of changing the food that you put into your mouth, and how quickly. But what traditional medicine does is you go get the tests, and then you go see a rheumatologist who, rightly so, learns about medicine and puts you on medicine, and you don't get to get off.
And think of what you miss by not doing the legwork of figuring out what the right fuel is. You end up taking anti-inflammatories for your joint pain, which what's the number one problem from anti-inflammatories?
GI bleed and kidney.
Yeah, it's leaky gut, right?
Yeah.
So now it's just, here we go, around the circle. You get on disease-modifying agents that suppress your immune system, right? Well, that's pretty tricky. We don't want the immune system fired up, but we don't necessarily want to suppress it either. So that becomes very complex. I received a telephone call today from a gal that I've seen right here in this clinic that has seizure disorder. And we focused on putting the right fuel into her body. No seizures for 18 months. Then she goes to a birthday party, she eats birthday cake, pizza, and just kind of relaxes for a night. None of that's even bad. Just relaxes for one day and has a massive seizure the next day. And so I'm not a bread hater.
Right.
I live in Idaho where we're loaded with grain farmers. They're all my friends, right? This isn't personal. But you would never put unleaded gasoline into a diesel engine. And there are certain people who are running around with diesel engines and they're constantly putting unleaded gasoline in the tank. And it boogers them up.
How do you explain how do you explain why is it that things like wheat and or the flour, basically in the United States, which is different than in other countries, how does that manipulate and or change what our gut is doing and open the body up to that technique or that term, leaky gut?
Yeah, okay, so this is a super tricky question and I'm going to go really fast. But if we take a wheat molecule, it's a protein, right? So it's this protein has all these little amino acids, and these amino acids are in a sequence. The immune system looks at that sequence and recognizes it and says, I don't like that. I'm going to create an immune response to that. Well, that same amino acid sequence or a similar amino acid sequence is in your thyroid, or it might be on your adrenal gland. And the immune system gets confused and said, hey, I've built an antibody against this sequence of amino acids, and that thyroid looks just like what I was just offended by down in your gut, so I'm going to attack your thyroid, or I'm going to attack your adrenal gland, or I'm going to attack your brain and you're going to have a seizure, or I'm going to attack your joints and you get what's like a rheumatoid arthritis in the synovium of your joints. So that same thing happens in the gut. The immune system actually breaks down proteins called occludins and zonulins. it gets really technical, and I don't know for our sake if we want to get that technical, but the simple answer is it's molecular mimicry, where the immune system sees something that mimics what an antibody is responding to and fire away. You're in trouble.
I tend to explain to my patients because this whole everybody being gluten-free thing, everybody thinks they need to be gluten-free. And it's not that everybody needs to be gluten-free, but I explain the gluten within the United States has changed over the years. And so gluten 25 years ago was not the same. Our wheat 25 years ago is not the same as it is today. It's genetically modified so that the farmers can have their crops withstand major ordeals, storms and the
pesticides, and herbicides.
So our wheat is ironclad so that nothing can kill it. And then we eat it.
Including the bacteria in your gut that can't digest it and just say, what the heck is this?
So then we eat it and your body says, what in the world is this? That's that foreign invader. And then the body says, this isn't supposed to be here. I'm going to attack it. And then that's when all that imbalance, the good bacteria, the bad bacteria, everybody's learning about, being on probiotics and prebiotics and what does that mean? And
so if a person has a gluten sensitivity or a milk allergy or sensitivity, like you've talked about this patient and her mother, do they have to stay off gluten forever?
No, and this is how I hooked her. I said, I just need you to do this for me for 90 days. And then in 90 days, we will reevaluate what's going on, because it doesn't necessarily for everybody mean forever. But if you can get that gut to heal by doing other types of things as well, certain supplements and different ways of eating, then that gut can heal and you can slowly start to reintroduce those things and see how you react. So that's a really important thing, because people get confused and they think, I'm not going to do it at all because I cannot do that forever. I love my bread, I love my pasta, I love my ice cream, I love my this, I love my that. But this is kind of what I tell them. You know what? It's really a lot of work to get healthy. But if you'll just stick with me and let me work you through the baby steps, if you feel better, then we keep doing it. If you don't feel better, then we got to figure out why. It's probably not this. What else is it? So.
And maybe I could wrap up with this statement. I totally agree with Christina, by the way. You don't have to do it forever. You just have to do it long enough that your immune system calms down, and oftentimes you can reintroduce foods and you do great. If you're sitting out there with these weird symptoms that people have not been able to figure out, seasonal allergies, chronic migraine headaches, my back hurts all the time, and I've been to the back specialist and my MRI is perfect, I got leg pain, I have these weird rashes, or I have autoimmune disease, and I went to the rheumatologist and all of my antibody tests were normal, and so the rheumatologist is like, I don't know what it is. Here's
medicine anyways.
Yeah, here's meloxicam. Then you got to think about it differently. Come see us, come join us, come spend a week with us right at the Country Health Clinic, and maybe we can help drill down a little bit and help identify why you've been streeted but not necessarily treated.
Yes. And there's so many fun things that they do here at the Country Health Clinic in order to rebuild that immune system. Red light therapy and the theta bed and ozone therapy and IV therapy, so many things to get those basics built back up and to really heal that body and allow a whole team of people to really just care about you, pour into you, help you figure out what it is that you can do to take back your own health, as opposed to relying on somebody else telling you, well, here's the test and here's the treatment. And so we just love it here. We find that it's just very rewarding to come to the Country Health Clinic, because we get to see people's lives change, and that's why we do medicine.
So come see us, make sure you subscribe to our podcast, and we'll see you at the next episode.
Thank you.